Clear prop.
Star 738, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear touch and go. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I am fantastic as always. This week we are doing a number of things. We have a new challenge, so everybody that responded to the challenge a couple weeks ago, thank you, and we are going to incorporate that new challenge in every show. And this week we are going to do a mock check ride. Wally and I are going to go through the process of having a private pilot check ride together, and I think those of you that have passed your check ride will reflect and think about some of the things you maybe forgot. Those of you that are prepping and planning on taking a private check ride, you're going to get a mountain of information. I think this is going to be a two-part show. We're going to do part one today and try to get through everything through the ACS, the new ACS, just released by the FAA May 31st of 2024, and give everybody some insights and thoughts and just challenges in general about how to go about approaching a private pilot check ride. Wally is done. I think, are you in the 4 digits yet?
Oh, yeah. 1,080, something like that.
1,080 check rides, of which I'm going to guess probably close to 700 plus are private, just based on the way that the certifications and ratings work. So I'm sure you've done 700 plus private check rides.
Yeah, it may not be that high. It seems like I'm doing more of other stuff here lately, but I don't know. For sure more than 500.
So we talked about this for years since we've been doing this show, that the check ride is an open book test. And I still meet people at the flight school who have a down face. They say they weren't successful, and they tell me, I had no idea that this was going to come up. And I'm like, well, I'm sure it came up early in your training, and I'm sure it's in the ACS. So how did you prepare? And it's the same answer all the time. I just studied. I just watched videos on YouTube. I just read the books. And there's this brand new ACS that is still the open book test for all check rides. And if you don't sit down and go through it, you really aren't going to be prepared. It's the old saying, preparing not to prepare. What does it go? How's it go, Wally? The lack of preparation is preparing to fail. And if you don't prepare for the check ride using the ACS, you're leaving a big hole in your repertoire of opportunities.
Right. And let's first start off very basic. What does ACS stand for? It stands for Airman Certification Standards. So it's basically the standards from which the examiner will evaluate your check ride. Now, certain things are very cut and dry. I mean, it tells you on a short field landing that you can't land short, but you can land X amount of feet past the line. Now, do we have a tape measure? We go out and it says, well, it says 200 and you land 203, so this is unsatisfactory. No, we don't have that, but we have ways of figuring that out. It gives standards. What are your altitude standards on a steep turn, and that sort of thing. So, so the next step is, well, where do I get a copy of the Airman Certification Standards? Well, you have two options. You can go to the FAA website and download it for free. Just go to FAA.gov, and in the search bar, type in Airman Certification Standards. And boom, it'll pop up, and within 8 seconds, you can have a PDF downloaded to whatever device you happen to be on. And then there are all kinds of, then if you want to print it, you could print it. It's, I don't know, I'm looking at the private
87
ACS.
pages.
Okay, 87 pages. Or, you could go to a third party. You could probably go to your local pilot shop and buy a copy, probably for less than $20.
I think we sell it for $9.95 at United Flight Systems.
Okay, so less than $10. So that's your option as well. And, I can remember sitting in classes in college a long time ago, and when you walk in and the professor, talks about the class, okay, we're gonna study this and this and this semester. And when, everybody wanted to know where the test questions are going to come from. If he ever said the test questions are going to come from this document, all of a sudden you saw everybody picking up their pen and writing down the name of that document, because they're going to go and purchase that document right then, because, man, that's the test. And, a lot of the attitude was, I just need to get a good grade in this class so I can graduate. Well, I'm telling you, this is the ACS. This is the test. The ACS is the test. So many of my applicants, when I talk about the ACS, they don't know what I'm talking about. I get the deer in the headlights look. I go, well, it's right here. It says right here. For instance, for every landing for a commercial and a private pilot, one of the lines in the ACS is complete the. I think it's. And I may be not wording this exactly correct because the wording changed a little bit, but it says complete the appropriate checklist. Well, if you don't use a checklist, you're not completing the appropriate checklist. So the very basic premise of using, the first thing to complete a checklist is to use it. And if we're coming in landing and not using a checklist, well, we don't meet the requirement. So by the book, that should be an unsatisfactory check ride. So
I think a lot of times I hear people talking about maneuvers. I think the majority of people in a flight training environment are worried about the maneuvers and successfully completing the maneuvers. But there's so many other things, right? I've heard recently in the last 90 days someone failing a commercial check ride for not saying clear prop, right? And it's specifically called out in the ACS that they must clear the area before starting the engine, right? There's little things like that people bust on that I think people are like, oh, that really shouldn't count, but it's part of the whole thing. It doesn't meet the standards. As I was preparing for this podcast, I read the appendix, because I think the appendix carries some gold in the ACS, and everyone is wondering, what do I have to do during slow flight, or what's the real maneuver characteristics of slow flight? And there's a little paragraph that says that you can let the stall horn occur, but you must correct. Failing to correct and take action, continuing to deviate from the standard, could result in a disapproval.
Right.
And so there's everything you would probably want to ask a DPE before you met that DPE is covered in the ACS. And this is our attempt at taking you through it step by step, giving you hopefully a lot of gold as you prepare or get better or do a flight review on things that you need to know that are right here in the ACS. So with that, where do we start, Wally? I just met you. I'm in the room. I'm nervous. I think I got everything. I think I'm ready. How do we begin?
Well, let's back up. Let's back up to yesterday. So before we even start the checklist, as an examiner, we are required to create what the FAA refers to as a plan of action. We call it our POA, plan of action. And plan of action is a document, and it must be written, and it can be electronic, and mine is on my iPad. I create a plan of action of how I want to conduct this particular check ride. And the plan of action is created using the Airman Certification Standards. So everything that is required for me to cover is on my plan of action. So I'm not... Now, I have the ACS very close by, so if I need to reference it, because, the The standards are different depending on whether it's a commercial or a private or whatever. So a lot of times on a check ride, I'm referring back to that and I'm going, oh, was this 200 feet or was this the 400-foot one? So I'm referring to it quite a bit. And, there are slight modifications or slight changes to the ACS as it comes out. So I will have this written plan, and it starts from the very beginning. I mean, the very first line on my plan of action is the name of the applicant. And, I write on my iPad with my handy-dandy Apple Pencil and put in the applicant's name, the name of the flight school, the CFI name, the date, the type of airplane we're using, the N number of the airplane, all the pertinent information that I think is important. And so, once we have gone through the qualification phase, okay, let's make sure you have your proper documents, government-issued photo ID, all that kind of stuff. And we take a look at the airplane, make sure it's got a current annual, and the airplane is airworthy. And, I'm ready to go. Then we're going to say, okay, the test has begun. So the first thing, if you pull up the ACS, it's broken down by areas of operation. And basically the ground portion of the check ride is pre-flight preparation. So here we are in a briefing room, and task A under pre-flight preparation is pilot qualification. Now each task under the ACS is going to have some knowledge elements, some risk management elements, and some skills elements. Now, as an examiner, we are required to cover every one of the skill elements. We have latitude to pick one risk management and one knowledge element. Now, very likely they're all going to coincide. Not very likely, but very possible that they're going to, once we talk about that skill element, it may cover that knowledge element that's above it. So, for instance, as I'm looking at Task A, this is private pilot pre-flight preparation, Task A, which is pilot qualifications. The skill element is the applicant exhibits the skill to apply requirements to act as pilot in command under visual flight rules in a scenario given by the evaluator. That's a very broad question. So, and we don't really have to go in order. So the first thing I will say to the applicant, I give them a cross country that is beyond the range of the airplane. So they have to pick a fuel stop. And I'll say, okay, where are we going? We're going from airport A to airport B. Okay, how far is it? How long is it going to take us? How much fuel are we going to burn? How much fuel are we going to have when we land there? And then I'll just say, well, how's the weather? Can we make the flight today? So I'll just get a general overview of the flight that we're going to make today. And then after, a brief discussion about all that, I'll dive into the pilot qualifications. So then I will ask them, okay, well, tell me what documents you must have in your possession to operate this flight. And, we'll get into the pilot certificate, whether it expires. We'll get into the medical certificate and how long their particular medical is good for. We may have a 26-year-old who has a first-class medical that was issued a year and a half ago. And, if this is a private check ride, I'll say, tell me how long that medical is good for private pilot privileges. And so we'll get into that. I may get into the, you're taking me on this flight. I really want to make this worth your while. I'd like to pay you $500 a day. Pay for the cost of the airplane, and pay for your room and board and all that good stuff. And, of course, I'm getting at is as a private pilot, you can't do that. So as we discuss all that, as I go back and I look at the knowledge requirements, right under knowledge, it says documents required to exercise private pilot privileges. So we've discovered that, and actually privileges and limitations is also under the knowledge elements. Now under the risk management, one that's there are two elements under risk management. One of it is proficiency versus currency. So we will talk about what we need to be considered current for this flight. And I will say that the flight is taking place a week from today. So you've just taken your private pilot check ride. So the flight review portion is met. But what I'm getting at is 3 takeoffs and landings within the previous 90 days. And then we'll get into, is it in the same type airplane, and those sort of things. And there's actually a lot of confusion with that. I mean, I can't tell you how many awkward moments I've been in a room where they're saying, yes, it has to be in the same type. And then we'll jump into, okay, if we're in a Cessna 172N model, November model, well, are we considered current in a Sierra model? And so a lot of times this gets the applicant to dig in the book, and then they'll come back and they'll say, wait a minute, it's category and class. So that 172 works for the Piper Archer as well. And then there's under risk management, it's flying unfamiliar aircraft operating with unfamiliar flight display systems and avionics. So that goes into if we have flown nothing but a steam gauge airplane, are we legal to go out and rent a G1000? And the answer is yes, you are legal. I've never met anybody that thought that would be a good idea, and I don't know of any flight school that's going to allow you to do that. But it is legal, and it's a little bit of a head scratcher that it is legal. So with that, that's probably a 15-minute discussion by the time we talk about all that. So we've covered task A in the ACS under pre-flight preparation, which is pilot qualifications.
Well, when you get to task B, that's pretty simple. It's just aero and aviate. Can we move on?
Yeah. Okay. So task C is what? No. So task B. This one always, and this is where a challenge question is going to come from today. So I think most people, and I think one thing we have to, and this is talking to CFIs specifically, we got to be careful about teaching acronyms. I can't tell you how many times I will ask an instrument applicant, okay, or maybe a private applicant, I'll ask them cloud separation requirements in Class Charlie airspace, and they'll say, oh, it's 3152. And I'll say, okay, well, what does that mean? And they don't know, but they know the little acronym. Or for IFR instrument alternate requirements, they'll say it's the 1-2-3 rule. But they don't know what the 1-2-3 rule is, but they can say the 1-2-3 rule. So I think it's important that as CFIs, we're teaching the material first, and then maybe teaching the crutch or the acronym later on. So what I get with airworthiness requirements, say, okay, we're flying 123 Alpha Bravo today. It's a Piper Warrior PA-28-161, let's just say. And I'll say, tell me what documents we must have on board the airplane today. And this is when they'll go into, the acronym ARROW, and most people will say the airworthiness certificate, the registration, and this is where I hold my breath. They'll say the radio license for the airplane. Sometimes they'll say if we're going overseas. Sometimes they'll say if we're going international. And then they'll tell me operating limitations, operating handbook, that kind of stuff, and weight and balance information. And so this is where I'll say, well, since you brought it up, tell me about what radios need to be listed on that radio license, since you brought it up. Now, if the applicant doesn't bring it up, I wouldn't ever go here. But this is kind of a little fun time in the Checkride. So
it also creates today's challenge question, as you mentioned, Wally. So today's challenge question is, what radios need to be listed on a radio license if you were flying a qualified 172 to fly under a Bravo shelf? So there's some hidden gems in there. So you're flying a 172 that's legal to fly under the Bravo shelf. What radios need to be listed on that radio license? You can submit the challenge answers to Bobby@BehindTheProp.com, and we will follow up with another T-shirt winner and some photos later in the week. We're going to actually draw for 5 T-shirts this week, so keep submitting. Won't just be the first person. The first person will always win, but we'll also put every other option in a big old bucket and draw some names so that we give away at least 5 T-shirts this week to listeners who answer the question, what radios need to be listed on a radio license if you're going international in a 172 that's illegal to fly under a Bravo shelf? Good luck.
Yeah. So, I think what this, there's a certain amount of gamesmanship to taking a practical test. No question. There's no question there. So a lot of times, and our good friend, the other DPE in Houston, did this to me, and I failed. I failed this test. But he held up a pen, a writing utensil, and he looked at me, and he said, "Do you know what this is?" And my answer to him was, "A pen."
My answer was writing. Mine was a writing device because I was trying to be all cool, and I said writing device.
Right. Okay. Yeah, you were there. Yeah, we were all together, and he looked at us both, and he said, "You didn't answer the question." And I thought, oh God, I can't believe that. So the question he asked was, "Do you know what this is?" The only viable answers are yes and no. And, of course, I did know what it was. It was a pen. As well, you knew what it was. The correct answer should have been yes. So a lot of times we talk a little bit too much. So, I actually, although we're not allowed to teach on a Checkride, but I do use that question as hopefully a learning moment. I'm not teaching, but hopefully the applicant is learning. And as we debrief, I'll say, you're giving me answers that were irrelevant for this Checkride. We're going from Houston, Texas to somewhere in North Texas. We're not going anywhere near international. So you didn't even have to bring that up, and probably would be in your best interest to not bring it up. So anyway, and in fact, I have tried that Pat Brown question with many applicants just out of fun, and I'd say 85% of them do not answer it correctly. And I tell them, hey,
I've yet to have someone answer yes or no, to be honest.
Yeah,
100%.
I know. And I tell them, hey, I failed it too. So we're in the same bucket.
So obviously they go through Aero. They have their weight and balance. They're pretty prepared. The radio license is a normal stumbling block. We get through AV8 spelled with a 1, which is another bad acronym, but but maybe a helper to help people realize what they need. I remember memorizing these dates and times and trying to remember 24 calendar months versus 2 years and go through all this stuff. But assuming that the airplane is qualified and airworthy, and you move on from that, we move into task C, which is the one that everyone hates, I think, from a private pilot. I remember weather information was the most boring thing in the world for me. But it is very, very important, right? So there's a lot of stuff here, and the reference material is listed in great detail in each of these sections, by the way. So if you wanted to know where all the FAA weather information is coming from, it's in these books, which is the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, the AIM, an ACS on weather, and the regulations, of course, right? But give us a typical weather conversation, Wally. We did a great show with Pat that was all about weather, so we don't have to spend a lot of time here, but two minutes on what you're expecting from weather based on, you're going to start, I think, in the skills section, you said, right? So what weather resources did they use to come up with their decision for today? I'm assuming something like that.
Well, my first question is, how does the weather look for our flight? Kind of a very macro answer, and I'm looking for, looks pretty good, or oh boy, it doesn't look good, and then I'll follow that up with, could we make the flight today? I tell all my applicants to plan the flight 2 hours after the start of the ground. So typically we start at 8 in the morning. So we're planning on this flight leaving at 10 a.m. And, the question for me is, can we go? Are we going today, or should I go rent a car? Because the scenario I give them is they're flying me up to this destination that's probably about 500 miles away. And so in most cases, they're going to make a fuel stop. So usually we're going from somewhere in the Houston area to somewhere around the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, some airport up there. So, I just want to know, hey, what's the weather like? Can we go? And so, a lot of times we'll get, well, no, we couldn't go because there's ground fog at our fuel stop airport. I go, well, okay, when did this weather come out? Well, it came out at 6:55 this morning. Okay, well, by the time we get there, it's going to be almost noon. So, so that will get them to hopefully look at the forecast rather than the actual weather, because we know that typically if there's fog, it will likely burn off. So then we'll get into, this will a little bit morph into some of the cross-country planning, which we're going to talk about later. But then we'll talk about, okay, well, what altitude did we pick? Tell me why you picked 6,500 feet. Why not 8,500? Why not 4,500? And I'm certain, and none of them are wrong. They're all right. They're all viable options. But why did you come up with this altitude? And then it may dovetail into, okay, well, what true airspeed will we have at 6,500 feet? So, I in my orals, I'm not going line by line through the ACS. I am trying to make this practical. I'm trying to make this like real world. At 6,500 feet, we should have a true airspeed of 108 knots. And then I will say, well, where'd you come up with that? And occasionally I get, well, that's just what we use. Well, that's not what we want. And I want them to say, well, I got it from right here in the cruise performance table, 108 knots. 8.1 gallons per hour. Okay, that's very good. That's what we're looking for. So again, we started out talking about weather, and we kind of got over into performance. So it's not, everything runs together. It's not segregated. We're not going to just sit here and talk about weather. We're going to talk about other things. And that may lead us into, okay, well, we're at, if we're going to go at 6,500 feet, and we're flying through this area, what about this prohibited area right here? Can we fly over this prohibited area at 6,500 feet? So now we're talking about airspace. We're talking about special use airspace. And, again, I want to make this, the ground portion, like a discussion about a real flight. If we were really going to go fly this flight tomorrow, hopefully these are the things that you would think about. And then at the end of it, as I look in the ACS under Task C, which is weather information, under the skills, it says the applicant exhibits the skills to use available aviation weather resources to attain an adequate weather briefing. So I'll go through, I'll say, well, how did you get this weather briefing? And, how did you start planning for this flight? And, a lot of people will say, well, 3 days ago, I started looking at the Weather Channel on TV. And to me, that's gold. Is watching TV on the Weather Channel, is that an FAA briefing? Absolutely not. But 3 days out, is it a great idea? I think it's a great idea. We have major weather things that come through Houston called hurricanes. And, you usually know a few days ahead of time, or weeks, or maybe not weeks, but a week ahead of time that, hey, we have the potential for some really bad weather. So yeah, watching the Weather Channel 3, 4, 5 days ahead of time to kind of get a big picture is a great idea. I always go back to sports analogies, but you think if the Houston Texans are playing in Green Bay in December, you think they're looking at the weather and trying to forecast what kind of weather they're going to be dealing with in Green Bay in December? Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm just trying to get a feel for how we got all the weather briefings. And most of the time, the applicant will say, well, the night before, I downloaded my weather briefing into my EFB, whether it be ForeFlight or whatever they happen to be using. I think it's a good thing when you actually call up a weather briefer. And, some people will call the weather briefer the night before. The morning of, they'll update their weather briefing in ForeFlight, and they'll make another call. So, when you're calling a weather briefer, you're talking to a person, and it's confirmation. You're looking at everything. You're thinking, "Gee, yeah, I think this flight is a go," and I think it's a good idea. At my airline job, we have dispatchers. We call them on certain flights. We're required to call them and get a face-to-face briefing. When I say face-to-face, via telephone, but we do get a briefing from them. If this flight is over a certain time, we have to call. But I think that's all good.
If you happen to be a weather briefer, we'd love to have you on the show too, because I think there's a reality that if that's all they do every day is look at the weather and they know the rules and the weather and all that stuff, they're probably going to be leading private pilot into some decision making as well, being very helpful. I've heard it dozens and dozens of times myself on the phone that you might want to not go that way, or another route might be less weather on that other route, right? They got to be helpful. So if you're a weather briefer, let us know. We'd love to have you on the show. I think. Yeah, go ahead.
I think the phrase we get, VFR flight is not recommended.
Yes. and that's very, very, very realistic. Task D is cross-country planning, and I think we all spend a lot of time with our CFI, Wally, as we're getting prepared for this check ride, working through this cross-country planning. And I think I've said this dozens of times on the show, but I don't think I really understood cross-country planning until I started taking my family of 4 on real trips cross-country. Because when you have your prized possessions with you and you're trying to figure out fuel and weight and time in the air and what kind of fuel I want on the ground, it's very different than it's just you and your CFI taking these short hops 51 or 52 nautical miles away compared to a real 200-mile flight that really means a lot more to you, right? A lot more risk involved. But from a cross-country perspective, and we're pretty much out of time today, what are you looking for? I don't think this is as big of a deal as most probably think as it relates to the check ride, because you've really covered all of the cross-country stuff in your scenario-based conversations
Absolutely.
up to this point, right?
Yeah. I mean, because now, we're talking about the cross-country flight. Well, we have probably already, a significant element of the cross-country flight is your altitude. Well, why did we pick 6,500? Well, we already went through that. And another, the performance. We know we picked this altitude, and we have reasons for it. It may be airspace limitations and that kind of stuff. But picking your fueling airport. I mean, why are you going into this airport? And the applicant might say, well, my Aunt Sally lives 2 miles down the road and I haven't seen her in 5 years. Well, that's a great reason. That's a great reason to pick that airport. We may not make it there. We may divert somewhere else, but, I do like to get in the head of the applicant, figure out why they picked where they picked. And, I hate well, that's just what we always use. I hate that. I like to come up with a real reason for it. So by the time we get to the cross-country portion, we have already, the cross-country planning, the route, a lot of times is going to have to do with airspace. So, later on down the road, we're going to get into airspace and we're going to get into performance and limitations, and we've already covered a lot of that.
Yeah, and so let's go ahead and cover airspace today too, because it's pretty much the knowledge and what you need, what the plane needs. You've probably gone through a lot of this stuff as well. What's the airspace conversation / quizzing going to feel like as you're going through that material with the applicant as well?
Well, it's extremely simple, really. I'm going to ask them, well, on our flight today, we're just gonna go along the route, and I'm gonna ask them about the different airspaces. Okay, what airspace are we taking off in? Well, it's maybe class Delta. Okay, well, what are cloud separation requirements in class Delta? Well, it's this. All right. Well, okay. What now? Once we go outside that dashed line, what kind of airspace are we in? Well, it may be echo. Well, if we climb up to 6,500, what kind of airspace is that? Well, it might be Bravo. Well, as a private pilot, can we fly into Bravo? Okay, well, we can, but we have to have a clearance and we have to have certain equipment in the airplane. Okay, good. And by the way, if we're in Bravo, what are cloud separation requirements? Because remember, that one is a little bit different. I'll ask them about, hopefully, I'll find some Charlie airspace on the map, on the chart, and we'll talk about that. And I'm going to come up with some kind of special use airspace, whether it's a military operations area. This time of year with elections going on, a lot of times we have, TFRs, temporary, restrictions for VIPs coming in. We may have prohibited areas that we're flying above or around. So we're going to talk about the airspace and special use airspace and all that kind of stuff.
So we're probably about halfway through the check ride at this point. Good time for us to put on the pause button and cut out for today. If you're listening to this when the show goes live, there's a big storm called Burl coming through Houston. We're going to be all buttoned up tomorrow waiting for the storm to blow through. And we will talk to you in a couple weeks. Don't forget the challenge question. And as always, thanks for listening to Behind the Prop, and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.